I've got an exciting job today. We've heard a little bit about the 3 new group executives at Tourism and Events Queensland, and it's my pleasure to get to grill them. No, I'm not going to grill them, but can you please welcome to the stage Kim McConney, Marketing, Oliver Philpott, Commercial and Partnerships, and of course Richard Clark, Events. So everyone's been extremely good, and we've actually got a little bit extra time, which means I can probably throw in an extra question. But I'm going to start really easily, and Trish outlined some of the background of each of your careers that has led to your role here at TEQ. But I guess it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about some of your career highlights and what's led to you with the role at TEQ. So let's start with you, Kim.
It on? There we go. So I'm born and bred Brisbane, but haven't lived here for 25 years. I literally have been a VFR without knowing what VFR actually meant. And what I've loved over that time, particularly in the last 5 years, is, as Anthony said, you know, the way that Brisbane has changed is just remarkable. As someone who is from here but hasn't been here for such a long time, just coming in and out, you know, it really is a city that just transformed itself into a major metro powerhouse. And, you know, to be part of that journey to the Olympics 2032 and to be able to be part of a team that is putting Brisbane on a global stage and then really using it to highlight the whole state. How do you say no? How do you say no to something like that? And, you know, my mum and dad just were constantly in my ear going, you know, at some point you've got to come home. So so that, you know, that was really the opportunity. And I felt like from a career point of view, so many of my highlights had led to this. And probably for me, the time that I spent in the US market on sport, because that really taught me the power of standing out and being distinctive in marketing. And there's no more cluttered market than the US sports market. And really you start to learn as a marketer that, you know, what you're saying from a message point of view is really important, but the ability to cut through and get attention is even more important. And I feel like as I've come to this industry and how competitive it is, you know, it really is something that Trish mentioned, going to increase in competition, has hopefully held me in good stead. And if it hasn't, I'm sure I'll have a lot of people giving me feedback, which is great.
On to you, Ollie.
Don't worry, Kim, you won't be short of feedback with this industry, I can assure you. Look, 25 years in the tourism industry, fortunate enough to have a lot of different experiences, you know, starting off with TEQ, then running an RTO. I spent some time working for Brand USA. I've worked in business events. I worked for an airline for a short period. It's hard to pick a highlight, but certainly the last 7.5 years at Brisbane Airport has to be one. Really at the forefront of aviation attraction, working with those partners, business case development, detailed incentive modelling, all those sorts of things is just a completely different world that I think I can now take into my career and bring a lot of value to some of the interactions and conversations that I'm going to have in this role. But really looking forward to joining this new team and this new exec under Trish and actually creating a cohesive, clear strategy for the state with all of the complexity that comes with. And I think, you know, as far as the leadership of TEQ goes, this is probably the most energised, enthusiastic and optimistic, certainly in my observation, we've been for some time.
So I think to complete your career, you probably need to work in a hotel and then run a tourism experience, and you would have done the whole lot, Ollie.
I did run a hotel bar at some point, so I think I've ticked.
Of course you did. And Richard, you're not 3 months in, you're not 3 weeks in, you're not 3 days in, you're 3 hours in. But we'd love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, I think the question of how I ended up in this role is a really good one. I wasn't aware that I was actually looking to move from what I was doing at the time when I got approached about the role. And there were probably a couple of factors that really swung it for me. One is that I've been in Brisbane before and I understand what an amazing opportunity Queensland has as a destination, and being able to leverage that, and with the Olympics on the horizon, obviously just a huge opportunity. But also it rained 230 days in Auckland last year, and that really affects your mindset. Plus, when I first told my partner Andrea about the potential for the role, I wasn't sure she was going to go for it, but when I got home she was on realestate.com.au looking at properties, so I think we might be in here. But my background, I come from a professional sport background, so I led the New Zealand Breakers basketball franchise in the NBL for 13 seasons. Had some highs and lows, probably created the least successful franchise in the history of New Zealand sport for a while, and then was able to turn that into the most, where we had a period of 4 championships in 5 years, which was just an amazing achievement. But the piece that I really took out of that was the experience of building teams and what you do to build teams, and the thing that you work on is secondary to the team you build and the culture you build, and that's what success is really built by. And that's another one of the real the motivations of coming here. From what I see, it's a great team at TEQ. From my time in Brisbane, I knew only great things about TEQ, so great to be involved in that. I moved into major events early 2020, 6 weeks before COVID hit. I don't know, maybe it was my fault, but I learned about the transformational effect of events, like through that process, through that period of time, and I'm sure it was the same here, what events did to stimulate communities socially, economically, and across all aspects of communities. So I'd say just being able to have the privilege of having a leadership role in Auckland's response to COVID was a highlight. And most recently, I had the privilege of leading Auckland's host city program with the FIFA Women's World Cup, which was great for all the reasons from a sporting perspective, but also really interesting from a social perspective. That event and the Women's Rugby World Cup, which we also hosted in Auckland, changed fandom in New Zealand. We had completely different audiences. We had female-centric and family-centric audiences. And the way that changed the environment and what people's expectations from events were was an amazing thing to be involved in.
In a fantastic synergy, we get over 240 days of sunshine in Brisbane. So there you go, you've chosen the right place. Okay, let's step it up a bit. So we've set a pretty bold target for industry of 44 billion by 2032. How are we going to do that? So I'm going to give this question to Ollie and Kim. I'm going to let you off the hook, Richard. But I guess it'd be great to hear from you about how do industry organise themselves and how do we achieve an extra 10 billion over the next 8 years? Yeah. Ollie, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So I think a couple of things. The first is, and you'll see some data from the international guys later this afternoon, we need to factor in a correction at some point of the average spend that we're seeing because of the increased per person expenditure that's kind of exaggerating some of the figures. So at some point we need to anticipate some level of normalisation of the per passenger spend. So if you accept that to begin with, that's something we'll work on and we'll start to consider in forecasting. Second to that, I think, is the 44 billion target is the state target. We really need to understand the breakdown of that by region, and then we need to also understand it by international source market, which we're in the process of doing. So clarity on what the targets mean for each region and for each international source market is critical in getting a common understanding of that across all stakeholders, and importantly DTS, TIQ and all the government partners that we need to work with. That then leads to identifying constraints on the supply side of tourism to help us achieve those targets. And those constraints that we need to work on are going to be a lack of potentially air capacity in certain markets that facilitate the ability to achieve that growth, but also supply side constraints like accommodation in certain areas that we'll need to build accommodation led by the department in that policy side, the supply side, if we're even going to have a chance to reach that 44 billion. So the data and the supply side is then the next step. The step following that then is demand side stimulation. And that's going to be built into the annual business planning. That will be around where do we prioritise markets, where we prioritise our allocation of funds and resources, where we encourage industry to invest. And on that side, we all know there's a few markets that we still need to play in, we need to drive value from. They are New Zealand, it's still going to be China, it's still going to be some of our core markets. But then we also have to identify the cumulative opportunity of several smaller markets as well and start to find some resources to play in those areas. So that's how I see the phases of understanding the $44 billion target.
And I think the build on that, it reminds me of, you know, like how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time? Because I absolutely, you know, working really closely with Ollie and now Richard, it is about getting surgical and understanding actually where that 44 billion comes from and how do we resource and support that. But for me, you know, 3 months in, or actually 2 months in now, going around the state and then being in New Zealand, there is also so much opportunity because, you know, if you think about even across Australia, let alone internationally, there's a pretty limited understanding of what Queensland offers. And we talk about that all the time. You know, you talk about that here in Brisbane, we talk about it throughout the state. That to me is opportunity, because it's not that we have to build it so much today. There is an evolution, but there's just a very limited understanding. And as we start to blow that out globally and across the country, it really will stimulate the demand, and I think in a way that we need to see. So I found that really exciting, because every time I hear that people globally have quite a limited understanding of, you know, the breadth and depth of Queensland, that's an absolute opportunity for us.
Richard, I'm going to ask you about events, but you're more than happy for you to also chime in on the target. But I guess you're coming in as the new Group Executive Events, and it's an exciting time for the whole state. What excites you about the event space, and what does that mean for Queensland?
I think I am going to talk a little bit about the target without really knowing how to talk about the target. I think what excites me at events, and my philosophy has always been that the events aren't the outcome in themselves, they're a catalyst for other outcomes. So events need to play a key part in driving those outcomes of the you know, those key targets. And that can be economic, that can be visitation, that can be social. And I did an awful lot of reading on the plane of a lot of briefing documents, and you know, seeing some of the joint marketing and events strategies and how those fit together. How can events tell Queensland's destination story in a completely different way? Have a completely different message? How can they be the hero for that story? How can they have a different voice? For business events, how can those events, like working with the airport and airlines, how do they fill the routes that are strategically important to the state? That sort of bigger picture thinking, how can events be part of the solution to problems, not just events in themselves? And that's what's really exciting for me. The calendar of events here is incredibly strong, so it's about all of the things Anthony talked about before. It's about collaboration, it's about partnership, it's about stronger as one, so that you take all resource, all finances and investment resources are scarce in some respect. How do you maximise those by working together to common outcomes rather than fragmenting it?
Awesome. We do have a little bit of extra time. So I guess, I could take a question from the audience, really mix it up. Anyone got one? No? Oh, yes. Oh, Martin. How are you? Excellent. Is your question to everyone? Okay.
I think your observation about not everybody knows enough about the state. I guess if you looked at the TQ journey, which has been brand Queensland versus destination marketing, do you have any views on how, you know, Cairns or the Gold Coast or some of the outback can be highlighted as part of the brand Queensland strategy, or are you thinking of changing that?
Yeah, no, and spoiler alert, we'll be talking about it in a couple of minutes, but I absolutely think that the journey is about destination-led marketing approach, because we need to tell deeper stories, and I'll absolutely, so I agree with you, Martin. I think the Queensland brand has never been so strong. People love it, but what we need to do now is tell those deeper destination stories, and that becomes, you know, the front seat, so to speak. Yeah.
Excellent. I think I'm making the TQ team nervous. Anyone else got a question? Well, we are going to break shortly for afternoon tea, and you can absolutely chat to Kim, Ollie and Richard across that time. But I guess I will finish with one. In 5 words or less, what do you think the opportunity is for Queensland over the next decade? Time is now.
Oh, different, better, special.
That's really hard. Less than 5, man.
That's only 3 words. You've got 2 more.
Focused, incremental, and aggressive.
Left 2 spare. Very good.
I'm going to use 4, sorry. Bigger, bolder, iconic, Queensland.
Awesome. Thank you very much.